What is going on? It's Alex coming back at you with another video, and today we are breaking down my top 11/12 edge rushers in the 2024 NFL Draft. If you are new, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. You know how to use YouTube. Let's get right into this, breaking down my grading scale, and then we're going from actually number 11 down to number 1. So, also, there is somebody who I didn't really know how to classify. We'll talk about him first. But this is the grading scale. It's pretty self-explanatory. I do have this broken into different tiers, and just like every other video, so I've done a corners and technically two, because, you know, when you think about it, pre-combine, post-combine for the wide receivers. So check those out as well, but it's a very similar scoring system to what I have there, which is different than every other scoring system I've ever done for positional grading. But essentially, I have different tiers. I could have been a wuss and just said, hey, this is my tier 1, this is my tier 2. I am more than fine being ripped apart by people. That's perfectly fine for me. So it will be graded 11-1, but it will also be graded by tier. And by tier, I mean, this is what their role is going to be right away in the NFL. And then I think if they're a good player, they can boost a tier. If they're a poor player, they'll probably drop a tier. But if they're essentially really bad, or like poor motor, for example, and just don't want to improve, they could drop 2. If they're great, think about like Antonio Brown back in the day from CMU, like 5th round pick, they can go up multiple tiers as well. So that's what I love about it. It's kind of just a way to frame your mindset for immediate impact, but then also potential. And so the grading categories, it is a 100-point scale. It comes down to their pass rush ability. Of course, there's a lot of factors when it comes into that, but essentially it's proficiency, their comfortability, and just their overall actual performance. Run defense, very similar, except for in the run side. Impact of the line of scrimmage. This comes down to both actually run as well as pass defense. It is going to be, can you push the line of scrimmage? Are you going to be the one who gets pushed by the lineman, or are you going to be impacting the pocket, impacting the zone blocking? Like, are you going to blow up the play? It is the level of impact that an edge rusher has on a defender. This is a very good demonstration of lower body strength. When it comes to mechanics, that's going to be, do you have a full arsenal of moves? Do you have good balance? And do you have just basically the right timing? Do you have the intricacies down to the game? I actually have this as a 10-point category. Actually, no, excuse me. It is a 15-point category because it matters a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, I think the overall effectiveness is a little bit more difficult to progress than the mechanics. Like, you teach players who have a limited mechanics, but like understand timing and everything a little bit better. So I prefer to keep this only as 15% of the grading scale. Granted, that is technically second highest of all categories. But get off and bend, relatively self-explanatory. Athleticism, same thing. It combines basically explosiveness, speed, and strength. IQ is, how do you process the game? Do you know where the ball is? And of all positions, this might be the one that gets affected the most by this. There's a lot of these edge rushers that don't really know where the ball is. And if you don't know where the ball is on a rundown, you're essentially useless. So you're going to be pretty much designated to a DPR, which unfortunately some of these players that I really do love end up becoming DPRs because of it. And then it factor, actually versatility as well. Can you cover? Are you a, DPR, or are you going to be a 3-down starter? And then it factor, which is a new category that I've thrown into all of these. Essentially, it's an it/ain't factor. Shout out to my subs who have been able to coin that phrase. But basically, are you going to have a great motor? Do you have an injury in the past that has ended your past season? Do you have, talking about motor, but then do you also have, a poor frame? That could be it factor because it's not represented by the other categories, but I don't really feel like if I included a frame category like I did earlier in the year, it felt like a gimme category. It just doesn't make sense. And some guys who are 250 pounds are not really built to play as well as someone who's 260. But sometimes these guys are 270 and they're kind of, a little bit on the chunkier side. So I prefer to be able to take an it factor category where it essentially allows me to guide my board the way that, I'm not basically giving players free points, because this is designed to give us a demonstration of the overall player, and essentially that didn't. So let's get right into this. Starting out with my unknown, it's Bralen Trice. Y'all know he was my edge number 2 for a very long time, 275 pounds. I mean, hell, I actually watched Zion Tupuola-Fatui earlier today, and I thought he was, I still saw Bralen Trice. I was like, damn, I really love this guy. But He dropped 30 pounds for the combine. Can you gain weight? Absolutely. We'll talk about Latu Latu. Just saw a tweet from Dane Brugler where it was essentially talking about him gaining an extra 8 pounds since the combine and still performed well. But again, we'll talk about Latu later. Bralen Trice could get back up to 265 range, and then that could be perfectly fine. So he's extremely TBD. I think he could be an edge 2 on a team if he gets back to his playing weight. He tried to drop weight, didn't look good either. He looked almost as if he was coming off a sickness, like just structurally his body looked thin. And he's not a thin guy. He actually moves very, very well for being 275 pounds. He did not move well at all for being 245 pounds. So that's why he dropped significantly in those categories. But, he's a technician. He doesn't have the best bend on planet Earth, but, at that size, he used his frame and his overall power to really be able to dictate how the play was going to go. I have a lot of faith in Bralen Trice bouncing back, but it just genuinely makes me sad because I loved him the way he was. And even if he ran in the 4.8s, hell, Austin Booker ran in the 4.8s. That dude's 240 pounds. It's perfectly fine to be a little bit unathletic if the rest of your game makes up for it. And when I see a player completely revamp their overall build, that scares the shit out of me because it looks like they look at themselves in the mirror and say, I am not the player I want to be. And when you change yourself that drastically, that shows that all the tape that happened before, those 80 pressures that he had, he's like, that's not the player I want to be. So who the hell am I going to be getting on my team if that's not who you want to be? Who do you want to be? Do you want to be 245 pounds and a mid-athlete? I don't want you. But if you want to be 275, maybe a little bit more subpar of an athlete, but a really damn good player who uses his strength and frame to be able to win the match, that's something I'm willing to bet on. So, praying for Bralen Trice, but it does scare me a little bit because it looks like inside his own head, he doesn't think he is good enough at the way that he was playing. Dream fits, by the way, it's not really a big issue. Don't take it too seriously. I just think there's some teams that need edge rusher, and honestly, some teams that I have a fantasy of a player falling to. We'll see with the number one. I think I have the Eagles with a dream fit to Dallas Turner because I love him with Vic Fangio. It's not that deep, y'all. So don't really look at that too much. But praying for Bralen Trice. Number 11, I have Jonah Ellis. He fell quite a bit on my board. The more and more I watched him, he has those high-end reps where, beautiful, super tight spin moves. Big fan of that. He has a lot of tools in his arsenal. But one of the things that I don't like seeing is edge rushers getting completely locked up on plays. He has some reps where completely taken out of the play. I really want to see my edge rushers be able to consistently, at the very minimum, challenge their offensive tackle. And I didn't see that enough with Jonah on my restudy of him. There was something about it that really got to me. And his processing, his IQ in the run game might be the worst in the entire class. He looks lost, and he has a great motor. I have a lot of faith that, as a DPR, he actually has a chance to really make it in this league. And I love him going to a team that used to have his father there in Luther Ellis in the Detroit Lions. You could essentially use him as a longer-term James Houston as a DPR. But he's been extremely mediocre in the run game at best, and then his processing is garbo. And he actually has some pretty good processing, surprisingly, on screens and, bubble screens and such. It doesn't make very much sense to me where he can process that properly, but not in the run. Genuinely looks lost. Reacts a full second later than he should, and that leads to massive runs. So he's a very pigeonholed player the more I watched him, but, if you can be a pure DPR, designated pass rusher, for those of y'all who don't know that acronym, I think you'll be perfectly fine. Has really solid athleticism overall, and he does have all those moves in there where he's made some beautiful inside spin moves for sacks. I could totally see him working out. So there's a lot of faith still that he could be a very good player, but he is still going to be in that bottom tier. Because bottom tier of the top 12, right? We're not talking about of all these players. He's still of the cream of the crop. I still think he's a day 2 type of guy, but he is very pigeonholed in the role that he will play. Now we got Chris Braswell here at 10th overall. I just didn't get overly wowed by Chris. Maybe I could put him as, he was my fringe between that edge 4 and edge 3 tier, but Chris Braswell is a great player. There's not much wrong with him. there's just not much that really wows me. And in the NFL right now, we have a lot of really good edge rushers. You got to be pretty damn solid to be able to garner some real starting reps. So, that's why there's going to be a lot of dream fits that are very repetitive as well. Not many teams that I think will really need that upgrade. But with Chris Braswell, he was a little bit late on his reaction timing. Again, his IQ is just not super up there in terms of reacting. I thought that he just kind of played the role that Bama wanted him to play and didn't really do much more than that. Didn't really surprise at the Senior Bowl. Isn't really an extreme athlete. He did pretty damn solid. If I'm not mistaken, he ran the 4.6s for his 40. But, he just doesn't really pop off on tape. And he's a great compliment to Dallas Turner. And I love that for him. But you are literally seeing a significantly worse combo of Will Anderson to Dallas Turner with Dallas Turner to Chris Braswell. Like, you dropped probably a half tier with Will Anderson to Dallas Turner, and then you dropped a full 2 tiers from Dallas Turner to Chris Braswell, which I guess that does kind of make sense with where all this ends up. It's like 2 to 3 tiers, though, for Braswell and Turner. Like, overall, there's not much wrong with Chris Braswell. It's just nothing's going to knock my socks off, so that's why I don't really believe, when you watch a player, you can tell if they have the it factor. I genuinely was hoping that I could put Jonah Ellis above Chris, but the run defense for Jonah Ellis was shockingly poor. And that's why Chris Braswell eked out above him. I think that his consistent play, day one starting ability, and the fact that you don't really have any major holes except maybe processing in his game, I think that's why he'll still end up being a round 2 selection, but don't be too surprised if he ends up slipping to round number 3. Adisa Isaac is that next choice, and I forgot to change that B- to a yellow. These are the things that irritate me. But Adisa's uber smart, someone who I have a lot of respect for. I honestly think that, there's a really strong correlation between my IQ grades and my pass defense grades, or my run defense grades. Like, basically, if you know where the ball is, just being in the right position makes you a lot more effective as a run defender than just being really good at getting off blocks. If you think about it, as long as you're in the way and don't get moved very easily, there's a good chance that you're going to mess up what the offense wants to do. So keep that in mind as well. Adisa Isaac just knows what the hell's going on. And again, that's something that's very, very admirable. Not many edge rushers have that ability. My only issue with Adisa is that he wasn't awe-inspiring. I didn't think very many of his reps translated too well. I didn't really see him. I mean, he is sub 250, so it's pretty self-explanatory as to why in the Big Ten he's not pushing monster offensive tackles that are very much used to these 270-pound edge rushers. But I think that he was a little bit poor on his overall mechanics. I think that he needs to work on increasing his skill set, but when you look at Chop Robinson as well, most of these Penn State edge rushers don't really have a fully developed toolkit. So I'm excited to see what Abdul Carter does next year as an edge rusher for Penn State, because that is going to be wild. But essentially, Adisa, I love him being that edge 3, just being able to put him in, especially on rundowns, where you want your guys who are a little bit more of that pass rush savvy. For example, like Danielle Hunter, I think would be someone who I don't really want playing every single rundown, because I know that, I want him to be fully fresh at his a little bit older age. And with that fully guaranteed contract, I want him to be 100%. So that's why I love the idea for the Texans being able to get Adisa Isaac. And he doesn't even need to be the edge 3 because they just got Derek Barnett. But, he's going to be someone who you can rely on even in early downs. And at the end of the day, as long as you let those linebackers like Azeez Al-Shaair get to the run play, and you just make sure that the rest of the play doesn't break down, you are doing your job. And Adisa does that very, very well, so a lot of respect for him. This is going to be a surprise to a lot of people. We're going to go to Adisa's running mate here in Chop Robinson. So Chop has the highest ceiling in terms of the amount of growth for edge rusher in the class. Obviously, I have a -1 in there for a combo of reasons. One, he has poor balance. I saw this dude on the ground way too many times. So it works with mechanics right there, but essentially he's a really damn good athlete who has a couple really good pieces of tape. I don't see it on a NFL translatable level. So versus NFL caliber offensive tackles, which he didn't really play too many, I didn't really fall in love with what he was doing. And I do still think he's going to be an edge 3 right away. If you think Chop Robinson can start right away every single down, come on. Like, you know better than that. Because everybody knows you're going after the ceiling for Chop Robinson. That's why I have that +2 on the it factor. But again, -1 for that balance issue. He got injured during some of the biggest games or the biggest game versus Ohio State that I was really dying to watch more of him versus those tackles. But, just still super duper raw. But the ceiling is sky high. Obviously, you've seen those high-end pass rush moves, especially even from like on the nose, like in the zero gap, like straight up over the center. This guy can be a menace. And as an athlete, he's been both tested on the field as well as, at the combine to be a freak athlete. So you're taking a big risk on Chop developing into something truly special, but you do see it on tape. It's not just like you're picking up an athlete that ran incredibly well who has no tape. Like, there are a select few plays that Chop Robinson can perform at an elite level. And if you just increase the efficiency and make that a lot more consistent, then you have something to work with where you can start this guy almost every single down. Now, he's still working on his processing of the game. It's pretty indicative, like relatively poor run defense grade and IQ. I mean, he's super duper raw, but he's getting there. And this is someone who I would personally invest a second round pick in because of the fact that I know that he has that high end level tape. But you also have to have a little bit better in terms of your balance. You need to have better balance in there, because if you're an elite athlete and your ass is on the ground, I don't care how good of an athlete you are, you're not moving, you're not affecting the play. So hopefully Chop Robinson is able to get past that, because again, I don't want him to be a story of what if he ended up going to this other franchise and ended up performing better. I'm praying to God, but Chop Robinson, there's a lot to love, just a lot of questions that are left unanswered. Now we got Darius Robinson here at slot number 7. My first true guy who I think could be an edge 2 on a team. He is a bit athletically limited in terms of compared to the other athletes. Again, this is the same scale for Dallas Turner. So, there is significant tiers of difference in terms of athleticism. But overall, he's fine as an adequate athlete. C is adequate, just in case you are wondering. If you are new to this type of series, C is adequate for the NFL. So if you have below that, if you have any categories in the D, that's like a legitimate concern that you really need to have faith in. Darius has an incredible motor. That's why I gave him the +1 in the it factor. One of the first things I fell in love with him was actually I wasn't even watching his game, his tape. I was actually watching Ennis Rakestraw, and I saw him haul ass across the field. Now, he looked a bit gassed after that, which reminds me a little bit of someone who we have a bit higher on this list. But Darius Robinson, he puts in the work. I have a ton of respect for him. 35-inch arms, incredible. He's one of those players where I would be willing to take him probably top 40, if not higher, because of the fact that he is just great in every category, except for the athletic part. And he's shown to be adequate enough to be able to start at the NFL level. The question is, because some people want to kick him back to the inside, is he going to be a pure edge the whole time? And I didn't think he was amazing on the interior. He never popped off to me there. He really showed out as an edge rusher, and I think he should stay there. So that's my only big concern there. But of course, he does have the size to kick inside. So a big fan of Darius. Again, I'm not really going to go through the dream fits. It doesn't really make much sense for me to, because all that it is, it's pretty self-explanatory. What team needs an edge rusher? What team probably has a smaller edge rusher or a speed guy that could use a little bit more size on the D line? And, who's just going to be a good team for him, and what teams do I like? So I think it's a little bit better to give you a holistic view of the player, and then you could kind of put together the dream fits, because there's every single team that needs an edge rusher that you can put there. It's not really a reason for us to spend much more time than that. Now we got Mo Kamara at 6. This is a brand new addition to the list. I have him as on sale Hassan Reddick. He's a bit larger than Hassan. Not mistaken, Hassan is in that 230 range, but when you watch this guy play, woo, he flies. And he has a lot of moves in that toolkit. He did drop one because, if I'm not mistaken, he will be 25 starting out. So he's a bit older of a prospect, so I'm going to drop him a little bit for that. And, like overall, there's not anything that's actually wrong with Mo Kamara. He probably played around that 245 range, so it's pretty understanding why he wouldn't have the biggest impact on an offensive tackle at that size. It's perfectly fine. But, at that size as well, you're not going to be the best run defender. He tries really hard. That's what I do like about him. I could even given him a +1 in the it factor. Wouldn't have changed to where he ended up, but that is what it is. He is just somebody who is an elite athlete. He knows how to bend around a corner. He's super flexible, and actually, he knows how to get to the quarterback, and I love that about him. He's somebody who, he was originally a Hula Bowl invite, and then I think he ended up going to the Shrine Bowl where he started shining out. But this is based on his actual tape and not just one-on-ones, which one-on-ones are very, very good to watch, but he succeeded in that as well, so there's no real reason to overhype him as a prospect. That age combined with the fact that, he isn't considered one of the premier products, like whatever that means. But I think he'll end up being just a later day 2 guy. I think a team that would be looking for someone who probably will fit in just as a pure DPR, but has that flexibility to be something a little bit more like the Cardinals that could pair him up with BJ Ojulari would be a dream. So we got at number 5, Xavier Thomas. He's been kind of my guy this whole time. The more I watch Xavier, the more I love him. And he actually got up from 240 pounds at the Shrine Bowl up to 253 and still tested out very, very well. And once again, I did not color that freaking B+ green. Things like this get to me. But overall, there's nothing really wrong with Xavier Thomas's game. Like, he's just a little bit, I think he's just a bulldog. That could have been my comparison to him. He just likes to go at players. And, when doing one-on-ones at the Shrine Bowl as well, he showed so much agility that he didn't always exactly show on tape on a consistent level. But you got to see that flexibility of his ankle and his bend. And that Florida State game's a great one to watch as well. It's one of his worst graded games, if I'm not mistaken, and he still performed so admirably well. This is somebody who performs well regardless of the game, and he works his ass off and gets no recognition for it. So this is going to be one of those unsung heroes. One of my dream fits for him earlier in the year was Washington, and I'm keeping it that way because I love him paired up with KJ Henry, who he was in a rotation with as well last year, so it'd be very cool to see that. But, I mean, he's just super versatile. He actually he plays run very well, very smart, but he also can even do some coverage. And at 253 pounds, that's pretty damn awesome. So I love that for Xavier Thomas, someone who just doesn't get enough love, but I'm here to give it to him. Now at 4, we got Latu Latu. Actually, as of today, he actually got up to 267, up from 259 at the Combine. Ended up testing out very well in terms of his agility drills because we already know he's a very solid athlete. But here's my only issue with Latu Latu. That lower body strength doesn't show up on tape. He has short arms, but again, like my issue with short arms is if they're combined with a poor lower body. He doesn't have a poor lower body. He just doesn't have a very strong one. When you see him go into tackles, it's not very consistently that he is the one legitimately pushing the pocket, and he plays around 260, 265. He should be doing that a bit better. Now, in terms of block shedding, probably not someone who's better in this class than him. He genuinely does not stay blocked, but he doesn't always go through the blocker. A lot of times he disengages and almost backs off or stays in the same position. When the play is not exactly coming to you, you have to go to the play. So pretty much getting away from an offensive lineman can be good as long as you're going in the direction of the play and not away from it. That was my only issue really with him in terms of that. But overall, his IQ really improved this year. I got to give him credit to that. He did start processing the game at a much higher level. If you look at the growth curve, he's done a phenomenal job, and that is something that I like to bet on. So Latu's moved up exponentially on my board. Could have given him a +1 and it factor for that, but honestly, who really cares? At the end of the day, these are minute points. Like, the evaluation of the player matters a lot more than their overall ranking, but there's nothing really wrong with Latu except for the fact that when you have short arms, you don't have a very powerful lower body, tackles with longer arms and a good anchor can kind of have their way with you. And especially the ones who are laterally agile, who have all those, like the really good tackles, I don't like the fact that if he goes up against one of those, like one of the Trent Williams of the world, there's no chance of him winning because you're not going to be able to get around them because they're pretty fleet of foot. You're not going to be able to get through them because they have one hell of an anchor. And you're not going to be able to execute the proper moves because they are going to get their hands on you before you get their hands on them. So that's my big concern. That's why I think on sale Aiden Hutchinson's a great comp, because Aiden Hutchinson had that lower body strength. I think Latu Latu can easily get closer to that tier and can be an edge one for a team if he develops that lower body strength. So it's a pretty easy path to success as long as he does it. And of course, there is that neck factor that you can talk about, but I'm not going to do it. Only one team in the country, or one school in the country, said that he couldn't play, and that was Washington, where he was playing. So big fan of Latu Latu. I do think he's a really good player. You know, he's actually ascending up my board more than descending, which is a very big plus because, you know me, I'm a tough cookie. I am. I don't like to give players credit because, unfortunately, at the NFL level, not every draft prospect can be a superstar. So I like to give credit to the ones who I think could be superstars, and Latu is starting to look like he very well could become a superstar. This is my big surprise. Marshon Neal is going to be my third overall player. Now, third overall edge rusher. Let's get that straight. We're not going to put him as third overall player. That would be ludicrous. Something I would do, but ludicrous nonetheless. Now, my only issue with Marshon Neal, apart from the fact that sometimes he doesn't keep square and sometimes he can get pushed over a little bit, he actually has shown a pretty good balance to be able to, you know, where he's almost falling over and he can actually pivot and make a play in the run, which was awesome. My only issue is this guy tries too hard all the time. I have an issue with players that take reps off. This guy doesn't take a single rep off. I'm always saying, like, oh man, like, why are you going 50% on these plays? Because you should be going 100% where, like, you know, you're actually going to be a factor in the play. And that stands true for all players. But on the plays where Marshon Neal is a non-factor, this guy is still going 100%, and it gets him kind of gassed out a little too quickly for my liking. Like, I love the motor. That's why I gave him that +1. But let's tone it back to maybe 70% on the plays where you're essentially not going to be doing anything. Because this dude is straight up hauling ass 24/7. Again, I love the motor there. But let's be smarter and not always going harder. Pause. But, you know, overall, this guy was phenomenal. He was able to process the runs even when they were going behind him. Really good timing overall. There's really nothing that was actually bad about Marshon Neal at all. The tape was a little bit less athletic than the testing numbers suggested, but it's good to know that he has a faster shuttle than Chop Robinson. That's pretty awesome. He's way more fleet of foot and a lot more agile than even Jared Verse, who we'll be talking about very soon. So I'm a huge fan of Marshon Neal. I'd be willing to take him in the top 20. If he ends up going that high, I'd be perfectly fine with it. This guy genuinely knows how to dominate players. He has really, really good balance with everything. He's a true 3-down player. My only concern is, like, you can't drop him into coverage, so he might be a little bit role specific if you want someone who can have that coverage ability. Now, at spot number 2, this is an edge number 1. But this is a spot where I actually debated not giving Jared Verse that edge 1 conversation where he could be an edge 1 on a team. Like, a team doesn't even have a number 1 edge rusher. I debated, like, do I fully believe Jared Verse as the guy who could be a number 1 edge on a team? I decided on yes. So, like, I am taking a little bit of a risk with that. It's not a big risk in y'all's eyes, but it is a kind of a bigger risk in mine. Jared Verse overall is a very solid athlete. I think his get off and bend, like, maybe I should have actually raised up. Oh, sorry, spoiled Dallas Turner there, but we kind of all knew that was coming. Maybe I should have given like an A- get off and bend for Marshon Neal, but, you know, Jared Verse is a solid athlete. Not the most agile guy in the world, but, you know, he does get off the ball quickly. You know, he can bend where need be. He's a very strong player. He's very tactical. He knows how to be able to get off blocks. He knows the right timing. He's a very, very good player and has been for a very long time. The thing is, he's actually probably the best run defender that I might have seen at the edge position. Him and Myles Murphy are up there, but Myles Murphy ended up dipping off a little bit as his career progressed there at Clemson. Jared Verse almost ascended, and I love that about him. He ended up being 250 last year and then got up to 260 at the start of this year and looked really sluggish. I almost had him in the C's range for get off and bend and athleticism because he looked a little chunky and a little bit out of shape. Combine, he comes in 254, and looks really in shape. And I love that about him because it looks like he found the build that works for him. So I'm going to give him that credit. That's why I put him as edge 2 and put him in that edge 1 or that tier 1 conversation. So overall, there's nothing really wrong with Jared Verse at all at this point, except maybe you want a little more sizzle and steak on that 3-cone and short shuttle, but he honestly did perfectly fine on it. I think a team that will be looking for an edge number 1 should certainly be in the market, and if you want him to be an elite edge 2, you are in luck. But of course, we all knew this was coming. It's Dallas Turner taking a massive lead as my edge number 1. So Dallas Turner doesn't do really anything wrong. I still think he should be an edge 2 for 1 year, or maybe just have him be the edge 1, but have someone who's on the decline of their career, who, for example, like a Hassan Reddick, who knows how to utilize a similar skill set in terms of athleticism, flexibility, and everything like that. I think he needs a little more mentorship to hone in on being his best version of himself, because I feel like sometimes he needed that extra year of Wilt Anderson treatment, but just didn't get it. It's unfortunate, but Dallas Turner is an awesome player. If he drops in without a mentor, I still think he'd be a top 15 edge rusher in the NFL. But if he has the proper mentorship, he could easily be top 10, if not top 5, because there's not many guys who generate speed to power at that size the way Dallas Turner does. He has very solid arm length, I believe over 33 inches, and he has really great speed, 4.47, but he also is really comfortable in space. One of the best coverage linebackers in this class. If you took him out as an edge rusher and looked at him as a pure linebacker, not many players at the linebacker position who could even compete with him. So he'd almost be linebacker 1 for me right now if you took out every single rep of him on the line of scrimmage. So that's how awesome he is in that. Super smart in terms of his run defense. I mean, he's going up against Brock Bowers, who I have a lot of respect for as a run blocker at his size, and is able to look past Brock, not even care about the block, and still be able to make big plays. That's awesome. And one of the most cerebral, smart players that I've seen, especially in this class on the defensive side. So, huge fan of Dallas Turner. Once again, Bama has a superstar player who really, I don't think, performed as well as he actually should at the next level. So, I'm super excited to see it. Dallas Turner, you're awesome. And so are you. Thank you so much for watching. I love y'all for showing the love that you always do. Next, we'll be getting into offensive tackles because that is my next favorite position to grade. So we're going to be getting right into it. Thank you so much for watching. I love y'all. See you on the far side.